Of the now 49 things currently ranked on the Week I Review leaderboard, Black Mirror's semi-interactive cinematic experience Bandersnatch remains just above the bottom spot, where it has been ever since I reviewed it and Bird Box back in January. It really felt as though series writer Charlie Brooker just didn't have anything new to say and was using a gimmick in a failed attempt to cover that up. Which seems inevitable when you have a single man responsible for pumping out more than a dozen disconnected feature-length scripts over the course of just a few years. The first 2 seasons aired on Channel 4 in the UK and had 3 episodes each. Netflix doubled that output for its next 2. Quantity over quality, it seemed. But I really wanted to believe that season 5 having just 3 episodes again signaled a shift back in the other direction, that they would be made from the 3 best ideas and not the 3 only ones. No. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week I Review. You can call me a virtual reality enthusiast, and today I am talking about the latest season of Black Mirror. The show typically sets itself in a vaguely near future that is the same as the present, but slightly higher tech. Things like extremely thin or folding smartphones or translucent computer monitors are common. Really good virtual reality plays a pivotal role in many episodes, but usually there is one more overtly sci-fi technology that's really driving the story. A memory recall device or human cloning or implants with live brain filters, things like that. Whether any of these ever happen, some probably will and others probably won't, isn't the point. It's about seeing how technology changes the world. Unfortunately, this tends to be pretty surface level, so I am typically more interested in the implications of the stories than the stories themselves. My enjoyment of an episode is directly tied to how interesting I think its use of a technology is, and also how it's integrated into the narrative, even if that narrative is dumb or bad, as it often is. What else is there? So many of these episodes don't actually have anything to say about society. They just want to remind you that everything is bad, you're going to die, and the internet is going to make that death so much worse. But season 5 is actually a little different. It doesn't have much of the more fanciful stuff and isn't there just to cause pain. Indeed, 2 of the episodes are actually pretty optimistic, and most of its technology exists already. And what doesn't exist yet isn't new, even to this series. Indeed, all of it can be found in Season 4's opener, Uss Callister. The high-end VR tech in Season 5's Striking Vipers is the exact implementation seen in that episode. The user puts a little circle on their temple, starts the game, and then their eyes cloud over and they fall back in their seats as they enter the digital world. But in USS Callister, this was part of the set dressing, existing the same way as all of the other not quite real tech, but not itself being the driving technology like it is in Striking Vipers, where that is the big thing. Instead, what we have to worry about in USS Callister is a machine that creates a perfect in-game copy of a person using their DNA, which brings up a lot of interesting questions about consciousness that are completely ignored. Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2, Season 5's final episode, also has a person's consciousness perfectly recreated, though this time it is added to a robotic home companion instead of a digital crew member on a Star Trek analog. And guess what? They don't do anything with it here either. Virtual reality is kind of Black Mirror's bread and butter lately, which makes sense because it's something that pretty much everyone has dreamed about at some point, and it's a dream that feels closer and closer with each passing year. So there's a lot to think about and a lot that is worth thinking about. Striking Vipers might raise some interesting questions about how virtual reality affects real-world relationships, but ultimately doesn't, because the whole thing is just a metaphor for suppressed passions. I mean, the actual message of the episode is maybe try open relationships. And like, fine, that's a message, but it has nothing to do with technology. This is Black Mirror. Like, compare that to season 3's San Junipero, where virtual reality allows for people physically incapable of anything to live full lives, have romances that would be literally impossible otherwise. It's why San Junipero is often held up as the best episode of the series, because it's the only time that the show has ever truly woven technology into its thematic fabric while remaining optimistic about that technology. That episode makes good on Black Mirror's promise. Striking Vipers does not. As an episode of television, it's fine. The performances are good. The use of Tetris Effect as a representative of video games in the future is something I found hilarious, and actually a missed opportunity for Danny, since that game is best experienced in virtual reality. But the technology merely offers two characters the means to have an emotional affair. That it's this tech in particular isn't really relevant. It's missing that integration that I crave. By the same token, the second episode, Smithereens, must be a failure because it does not use any new technology or even have a new use for an existing technology. It harkens then all the way back to the first episode, which was also about a hostage situation that was always going to end with the kidnapper dead and the hostage free. And you know that there's not going to be anything new from the outset because on-screen text tells you that it's 2018. We're talking now about the recent past, not the nearish future. Smithereens takes aim at technology now, at Twitter and Facebook specifically. It's something of a power fantasy, where the fantasy is finally getting to tell Mark Zuckerberg directly that the thing he made is bad. And who hasn't wanted to have a private audience with Jack Dorsey to go off about how much worse the world is because Twitter exists? Billions of people would jump at the chance. And it is genuinely cathartic to hear Billy Bauer get shut down when he starts to whine about his own problems. Though that is undercut slightly by the cop-out that is having him refuse to stand behind his own company. A generous interpretation is that this represents the constant buck passing that goes on at the highest levels of these corporations. You know, nothing is ever their fault, etc. And there is a lot of that to go around in this episode, but the specifics of Bauer's complaining complicate that catharsis. The real issue is that everything is text. A man is angry that everyone is always on their phones. He wants to yell at the CEO of a technology company to explain why he is angry that everyone is on their phones. And he gets to yell at the CEO of the technology company about why he is angry that everyone is on their phones. His story is tragic, but it's just another excuse to rant about how awful it is that these companies prioritize engagement at the expense of their users' actual happiness. Years ago, I read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I did so because I, like Charlie Brooker, played BioShock in 2007 and wanted to be able to engage in a conversation about how the game followed the objectivist themes of Rand's magnum opus. Near the end of the book, the narrative stops so that a character can give a speech that condenses the previous 900 or so pages into about 80. And you have to wonder, why wasn't this just an 80-page manifesto? Why the hell did I read this whole book? And then you want to throw it into a fire. Smithereens is kind of like that, except shorter and with a less garbage philosophy. Charlie Brooker used to have a series of cultural review shows, Screen Wipe, News Wipe, Weekly Wipe. This speech seems like it was intended to be a monologue used in one of those if any of them were still on air. But since they're not, he decided to put it into his much more popular show and built an entire narrative that would justify someone saying it. Also, the cinematography is super obnoxious. The one interesting question that Smithereens ever so briefly raises plays a much larger role in Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2, which is widely considered the worst of the season, but also happens to be my favorite, and it's not even close. Feel free to dislike this video now if you haven't already. And my main reason is as superficial as any episode of Black Mirror. I really liked Miley Cyrus as Ashley O's song On a Roll. If none of the episodes are going to say anything interesting about technology, I'm going to gravitate towards the one with the jams. But seriously, I do think it's the one that has the most interesting implications, though before I explain why, I want to acknowledge music site Pitchfork's review of the episode. They weren't fans, for entirely valid reasons. What it has to say about pop star as prisoner is both well-trodden ground and also something that is being changed by the rise of acts like Billie Eilish, who, love her or hate her, is nothing like the perfectly manufactured pop star Ashley O represents, even if the experiences in this episode were inspired in part by Cyrus's own struggles. But where I think Pitchfork et al. Don't give this episode enough credit is in the way it captures something profoundly sad about the relationship between celebrity and fan, exemplified by the moment when the titular Rachel, upon seeing pop star Ashley O come out of the coma that had been forced upon her by her evil aunt/manager, cannot think to say anything but "I'm a huge fan." It's maybe intended as a joke, but it's not really funny. Separate from the issues of expectations, Ashley is not allowed to make the music she wants to make because her diehards will abandon her. Those fans don't see her as a human person with human feelings. She's an object. It reminds me of what happens when kids show up at the homes or offices of YouTubers. Those YouTubers say, "Please leave me alone," and then actual adults who somehow were allowed to become parents chastise those YouTubers for wanting to be seen as humans. And that inhumanity is key to the bigger ethical question of the episode, which has nothing to do with music and everything to do with life after death. In Smithereens, a side character, Haley, struggles with the aftermath of her young daughter's suicide and has become obsessed with accessing said daughter's social media, which she wants to see in order to find some kind of closure. This is like a D-plot, but it raises some interesting questions about what we leave behind when we die and whether we should be allowed to control that. Of course, there will only be more pain on the other side of that login, itself the type of thing that this show would make an episode about. And in some ways, they kind of did with Season 2's Be Right Back, which feels like the logical Black Mirror conclusion of the premise. But is her daughter owed privacy? Is Haley, as a grieving mother, owed access? And so we get back to Ashley O, who, after being put into a coma, is supposed to be replaced by Ashley Eternal, a perfect holographic representation. More than a perfect replication, in fact, the idealized version of the pop star. Last month, Philip DeFranco's Rogue Rocket posted a video about the future of the holographic concert as more and more late acts are touring again. It's a big deal and only getting bigger, and it is fraught as hell with ethical issues. Unfortunately, Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2 sidesteps them entirely by making Ashley Eternal the product of a monster. As mentioned, though, that's not the big tech in this episode that we as a society ought to be concerned about. That is Ashley 2. The robot doll that has the entire consciousness of Ashley O embedded in it, just limited by software to be more like what we think a digital assistant should be. Removing that limiter, an almost hilariously simple process, brings out the real Ashley with all of her actual emotions and memories and everything else, which is kind of horrifying. This is the thing that ties it back to Uss Callister. It's a perfect recreation of a consciousness. Is that human? Should it be? Is it conscious? And if it's not, it has human-born thoughts and feelings and memories, and we actively limited all of that. So what are the ethical implications? Is this some kind of digitized slavery? Can such a thing exist? And how far away are we, the actual world, from opening that Pandora's box? Honestly, Black Mirror provides valuable material for an ethics of technology course that every single person in Silicon Valley should be forced to take. Because I would be surprised if in my lifetime we as a society don't have to reckon with what Siri actually is. And I would like for the people who do that reckoning to have spent some time thinking about it. Black Mirror is asking big questions, often important ones that we may not need to worry about quite yet, but are coming up faster than any of us want to believe. I just wish it cared more about answering them. 6.2 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, that's great. If not, I'm sorry. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next week.